This is not an imp. This is just what an imp looks like. This is an imp, at least as far as GZDoom is concerned. Outside of the supplemental files and the game engine required to interpret and run all the information you see here, this is just about everything an imp is according to GZDoom. I like making custom things for GZDoom, and I want to build a custom imp with you so you can all say you've made your very own custom monster in Doom. In fact, I want to build an imp in 3 ways: an easy way, an intermediate way, and an advanced way. But I'm not going to dive right into it because I know that editing for GZDoom can be a bit daunting for newcomers. Instead, I want to take a moment and talk about the fundamentals of customizing Doom and exactly what makes it tick in a basic sense, because it can be really hard to get that information, especially in one place when you're just starting out. So let's say you've made your first map in Ultimate Doom Builder and you want to spice it up with some custom bits and bobs, so you've opened it up in SLADE. You're staring at the list of stuff, scratching your head. You know there's things called map info, or sound info, and Zscript, or was it decorate? But you're not sure what all of this means. So let's take a moment to understand some of the things and dig into some of the core basics of building in GZDoom. All the world's a stage, and all men and women merely players. Or however that quote goes. GZDoom is the theatre, and you are a producer and director building your very own production which will be run in this venue. And all the components of your WOD are all the various things required to make that play run smoothly. The map info lump is the run sheet for the whole play. It lists what each act and scene is called and their expected runtime, what music tracks should be played in those scenes, what effects each scene uses, and also what the narrator will say between each act. The maps are the various scenes in the play, and the textures are all the decorations those scenes use. The sound info lump is the sound tech that picks up what the actors are saying and relays it to the audience. And the image sprites are the costumes for all the various parts. Now this is one of those super cheesy plays where every actor gets a costume. Some people get to have cool parts like monsters or the hero, and others have to wear a tree, or an ammo box costume, or a red torch, or any other actual object you'll find in the game. In fact, the catch-all class name for all of these physical objects in GZDoom is actor. And where is it written how these actors should dress and act? Well, that's in the script, of course, or in this case, the Zscript. All of these separate bits and pieces work together to achieve a common goal to put on a grand play to delight and distract the audience or the player. And if you haven't made any changes at all, well, no matter. The GZDoom Theatre has its own script, run sheet, sound config, and music sheets are all ready to go. This is the standard Doom experience. In fact, this is exactly what every worker in the theatre will default back to, unless you bring in and explicitly tell them to use your own custom stuff. So let's step away from the analogy and briefly touch on exactly what the core lumps or files are that make up a GZDoom custom map or mod. A lump, by the way, is what we call an individual file inside of a WOD or a PK3 file. The reality is that there are a great many lumps that can be used to alter or customize the game experience, and including them all here would both make this video exceptionally long and tedious, and would mean hours of research, because honestly I still don't know all of them myself. So we'll focus on the most commonly used files in this video to give you a solid diving board while hopefully not overwhelming you too much. The number one thing I need to express though is that if you want to get into this world, you will have to do the hard work and explore the documentation on the Zdoom wiki. There are no shortcuts to mastering this, and it's truly the only way to reliably find out what is possible. The map info is the run sheet of your overall gaming experience. This lump was originally introduced in Hexen, and in a classic Doom experience it would define the names shown for each map, their par time, which MIDI is played for each map, which skies are used for a map, and any intermission texts and their location between maps or episodes. You can define broad things in map info that are specific for particular maps, or that affect the entire map set, such as how much control a player has when they're in the air, or whether a monster is allowed to telefrag a player, as well as the background image and options shown in the title screen. You can think of this as the technical document for your overall project. If you don't make any changes to this, your map will run fine, but the title screens, intermission texts, map names and so on will default back to the iWOD you're using to play the WOD. It's worth noting that there are different map infos available which take precedence in different ports of the game, UMapInfo, for example, is a mapinfo type that's supposed to be compatible with a wide selection of ports, but has less overall features available. Whereas ZMapInfo is a mapinfo type that allows for some GZDoom specific commands that can't be utilized in other ports. My video focuses on GZDoom because that's what I'm most familiar with, so I won't touch on the other options very much. The sound info lump defines any custom sounds you want added to your game. It acts as an intermediary between the sound files and the game and allows you to assign logical names that can be called on in your scripting or map making. If you wanted to overwrite some of the original sounds with some new custom ones for your monsters or weapons, this is where you would attach your new sound to the already existing definition. It's also where you would make a unique name for any new custom sounds that don't already exist if you're making a new object. It's worth noting that music for your game doesn't need to be assigned in sound info and can be read directly in map info by using the lump name of your imported music. The textures lump defines your textures within GZDoom. You might also run across texture 1 or texture 2 lumps, both of which are earlier, more broadly compatible versions of textures. But if you're working with GZDoom, I'd recommend using textures where possible. If you have new or custom textures you're including in your map, you'll need to import them to your project using SLADE and then make a textures lump to define them. Luckily, this can be done by selecting all your textures, right-clicking on them, and selecting the Add to Texture X option. In GZDoom, you need to make sure that your textures are sitting inside some marker objects called a namespace, which tells the textures lump where to look for these textures. In GZDoom, you can dump all textures and flats inside a TX start and TX end marker. However, if you're working with the texture 1 or texture 2 lumps, you'll have to split these up into pstart, pend, and fstart, fend markers, or similar, in order for the game to find them. There's a lot more involved with textures, such as creating your own custom ones out of patches and making animated textures, which I won't go into detail on because honestly, I don't know enough about it myself to be comfortable explaining it. So I'll leave textures at that for now. The decorate or Zscript lumps are the ones that I think scare the newcomer the most. This is where you can modify the game's behavior, monsters, weapons, logic, UI, and so on. It's here where any subsequent videos I make on the topic will be focused mostly on. To begin, I'll mention that decorate is essentially a primordial Zscript and was what was used to customize your game before Zscript came along. It still works perfectly fine, but is considered a depreciated object, and if you've used decorate in the past, I strongly suggest taking the plunge and jumping ship to the newer, more flexible Zscript. It's not as big of a leap as you may think, I promise you. The reason I recommend jumping into Zscript is that it is what will be supported and updated moving forward, and there's no telling if GZDoom will reach a point where decorate is no longer fully compatible. So if you continue using decorate, you're at risk of getting left behind. So the Zscript lump is the place which holds all the information about how the various components in the game act and interact with each other. It's in here you'll write your Zscript code, and it's helpful to know a little bit about coding. However, with some patience and research, you can get away with just copying and editing chunks of text in some already written code to achieve a result. Again, I'll say that if you really want to go down the path of customizing your game, then there are no shortcuts, and you will have to read the documentation simply so you can know what's available to you. I'd recommend starting by browsing the available action functions and seeing what pre-built functions there are, as these are the most immediately impactful pieces of code that can alter your game significantly without having to build functions of your own. Using these, you can quickly edit a weapon to make it fire extra missiles, or change up a monster so it explodes on death, or a whole range of other fun alterations. There are many things you can do in Zscript, such as creating objects that listen for certain things to occur in your map and act when that thing has happened, or making custom user interface items like custom menus and so forth, and admittedly I'm still learning a great deal of it myself, but the most widely manipulated part of the Zscript lump is using it to edit existing or create new custom classes, specifically what we call actors, which can be thought of as all the physical objects in the game that you can see. Weapons and monsters and power-ups, players, hanging corpses and trees, these are all actors, and this is exactly what we'll be doing in the next section. So now that we've explored the most important major parts that comprise the modern GZDoom experience, and looked at how these moving parts work together, let's tackle the Zscript lump directly and make a custom imp monster in 3 ways, so people of all skill levels and confidence can have a go at making something of their very own. Before we make our own Zscript edits, let's take a closer look at the Imp's Zscript and dissect it. So this is the Zscript for the Doom Imp. Each important section of the code is chunked into what's called code blocks inside these curly braces. The Doom Imp is a class, which you can think of as a blueprint or a template. Whenever an imp is added to the game, every individual one uses this template to make a unique version or instance of this class. This Doom Imp class is itself inheriting a bunch of code from an even more generic class called actor, which is denoted by the text after the colon here. The Doom Imp has two main code blocks. The first is the default code block, which sets and describes all the various stats or properties any Doom Imp might have. For example, this imp starts with 60 health, is 56 units tall, and has a speed of 8. It's worth noting here that this imp actually has a couple dozen extra default properties that aren't included in here because they've already got a value defined in the actor class it's inheriting from, which doesn't need to be changed. This is the beauty of inheriting. It lets you modify the values you want changed from another class, and will still use all the unchanged values without you having to rewrite them. You don't need to know what all these properties are right away, but it is definitely worth being curious and exploring them in the Zdoom wiki, as the more you know, once again, the more you're going to be able to do down the track. Outside of these properties in the default code block, you also have another type of input here, preceded by the plus or sometimes minus operators. These are called flags, and they're pre-made or predefined characteristics that change the way an actor appears or behaves in some consistent way. The imp only has one flag in this case, plus floor clip, which if we look at the wiki documentation, we can see means that when standing in a liquid, it'll just make the bottom of the monster sink in a little bit. The other code block in here is states. This block handles how the Doom Imp interacts with the world and also associates all the different imp sprites with certain actions. Now, before I explain these states, I want to segue quickly and take a look at the Doom Imp sprites. Specifically, I want to focus on how the sprites are named. You'll see that for every sprite, you have a standard way of naming things. There are 4 unique letters at the start, TROO, followed by an alphabetical set of letters, so TROOA, TROOB, TROOC, TROOD, and so on, followed by either a single number or a number, another letter, and another number. The first 4 letters identify the sprite set. TROO is the imp's sprite set. The next letter designates a single frame in that sprite, frame A, frame B, frame C, and so on. And the numbers indicate the rotation of the sprite. Some objects like ammo pickups or power-ups don't have any rotation, so they only need a single 1 here. But monsters in particular have 8 rotations. From the player's perspective, 1 being forward, 2 is front left, 3 is left, 4 is back left, 5 is backwards, 6 is back right, 7 is right, 8 is front right. However, in an effort to save space or time, you'll often find that the right rotations of the monsters are just mirrored versions of the left rotation, which is why you'll have, for example, TROO A2A8, which says to the game engine that this is the imp's sprite used for the front left angle and mirrored for the front right angle. Similarly, you might find a sprite that uses a single sprite mirrored as a different frame. In this case, the sprite name will be set up like TROO A1C1. This isn't the case for the standard Doom Imp, but we may run into this later in the video. Now that we've explored that, let's jump back into the state block of the imp. This block is chunked up even further with what are called state labels, which are named headers that handle particular actions. Let's quickly run through all the different labels in the imp state block and explain what they do. The spawn state tells the imp what to do when it's first placed into the map and hasn't seen or heard the player yet. The C state tells the imp what to do when the imp has spotted or has heard the player. The melee state tells the imp what to do when it's going to make a close ranged attack against the player. In this case, it just flows over to the missile state because GZDoom updated the imp's logic to handle both kind of attacks in the same state. The missile state tells the imp what to do when throwing a ranged attack at a player. The pain state tells the imp what to do when a pain state has been triggered, generally when the imp has been hit with an attack. The death state tells the imp what to do when it's lost all of its health. The X-Death state tells the imp what to do when it's lost a lot more than all of its health, and the Raise state tells the imp what to do when it's been resurrected, generally by an archvile. There are more state labels that exist, and you can even make your own ones to point to, but these are the most common ones you'll see in monsters. You'll notice nearly every line under these labels are set up in a particular way. A set of 4 letters or numbers, a space, another one or more set of letters, a space, a number, and then either a semicolon or a word followed by a semicolon. So let's break down what all this means. The first 4 letters are the first 4 letters of the particular sprite set associated with the actor. The next letter or letters tell the game which sprite frames to show, and the number tells it how many ticks to show that frame for. 35 ticks equaling 1 second in Zdoom. Then there might be a special word called a function, or in this case an action function, which is just a shortcut for a set of code that tells the actor to do something. Finally, there's a semicolon to designate the end of that line. The way that this is set up can be a little bit unintuitive at first, so I want to take the time to go through every line one at a time to explicitly describe in plain English what is happening with this imp. If you have a handle on this already, feel free to skip ahead to the timestamp on the screen now to the next section. So, when the imp spawns, it will cycle between frame A and frame B every 10 ticks. Also, every 10 ticks it will call the A-look function, which checks to see if a player is in the imp's line of sight, and if it is, it will play the imp's C sound and immediately move to the C state. If the imp hasn't seen the player, loop this particular spawn state indefinitely, i.e. go back to the start of this state. When the imp has seen the player, cycle between frame A, B, B, C, C, D, and D, in this order every 3 ticks. Also call the A-chase function every 3 ticks. The reason that there are 2 of each of the same frame in this line is because the developers wanted the A-chase function to happen every 3 ticks, but didn't want the sprite to change until every 6th tick. So the chase function is run twice for every change in sprite frame. The A-chase function will make the monster run after the player, but will change its angle by 45 degrees towards the player to give the effect that it's hunting them down. It will also randomly decide whether or not to make an attack on the player. If the A-chase function hasn't decided to attack, then loop this state indefinitely, or go back to the start of this state. When the imp decides it's time to attack, it'll play frame E and F for 8 ticks each, and on each of these 8 ticks, it'll call the A-face target function, which makes the imp turn to directly face and aim at the player. It will then play frame G for 6 ticks, and call the A-troop attack function. This function will decide if the player is close enough for a melee attack, and if it is, it'll scratch the player. Otherwise, it'll throw an imp fireball at the player. The imp will then go back to the C state. If the imp is hit and has its pain state triggered, it will display the H frame for 2 ticks, then show the H frame for another 2 ticks, but at the start of this, we'll run the A pain function, which just plays the pain sound of the monster. It'll then go back to the C state. If the imp's health has reached 0, it will die and show the following: frame I for 8 ticks, frame J for 8 ticks, plus call the scream function, which then plays the death sound, frame K for 6 ticks, frame L for 6 ticks, and call the A no blocking function, which makes the imp actor non-solid so players and other monsters can walk into its space. And then frame M for -1 ticks, which means show this frame indefinitely. It then tells the imp to stop processing any more frames and stay in the current state that it's in. If the imp's health has reached low enough, the X-death state will occur instead, which effectively does the same as above, except plays a different set of gibbed imp sprites, and plays a different death sound. If the imp's raise state is called, generally by an archvile resurrecting it, it will show sprites M and L for 8 ticks each, then sprites K, J, and I for 6 ticks each, then go to the C state. It's worth noting that these called sprites are just the imp's death animation sprites played in reverse. So there we have the imp in its entirety. But now we know what makes the imp tick. What can we change about it? Well, let's make our own custom imp and see if we can answer that question. Okay, now it's time to make our very own imps. We're going to make 3 imps in total, each more customized than the last. So let's jump in and make our first imp creation. And to do this, we're going to use inheritance. So just like how the original Doom imp inherits a bunch of code from its parent actor class, we can make use of inheritance to whip up a new imp that inherits from the parent Doom imp class. So let's do that now. So all I've got here is I've made a quick map in Ultimate Doom Builder, saved it as a WAD file, and then opened up the WAD file in SLADE. Next, I'll make a new file in here and call it Zscript, and then open the text editor for this file. So we're going to make a new class, which if you recall is like a blueprint or a template. We'll call it a tough imp. And after we'll add a colon, and then we're going to add two more things to this line. First, we're going to ask it to inherit or pull the code from the original Doom imp class, just by typing in Doom imp here. And then we want our new fancy imp to replace all imps in the game, which we can do by using the replaces keyword, followed by the class name of the thing we want to replace, in this case Doom imp. Now we've made the class, we want to open up some curly braces to hold all of our code, and we then want to type default and put some more curly braces in to hold our default information in a code block. In this we want to type health 120 followed by a semicolon on the first line. On our second line we want to type scale 1.3 followed by a semicolon. Then we want to make sure that for every open curly bracket we have a closed curly bracket. And that's literally it. You're done. Hit save, pat yourself on the back. You've just made your first very own modified imp. Just like the original Doom imp class inherited all of its other unchanged properties from the actor class, your custom imp is inheriting all the Doom imp's other default properties that we don't need to change. So let's jump into our map and see what the changes have done. And there they are, our very own custom beefy imps. Twice as hard to kill and 30% larger than the standard imp. Now changing the scale has only changed their sprite size, not their hitbox. So if you wanted, you could tweak the radius and height default properties as well to modify that. Good job, you're officially a Doom modder. Now let's take a step further and change some imp behavior. I'll also show you some extra concepts that you can use to integrate custom monsters into Ultimate Doom Builder. So back into SLADE and into our Zscript file, let's create another new class underneath the first one here. We'll call this a blue imp, and we'll inherit once again from Doom imp, but this time we won't replace it with anything. We're actually going to create some special code into the map info lump in a moment, which will allow us to choose our monster from Ultimate Doom Builder and add our new monster directly into the map. So this time around I want to adjust the scale of these imps to 0.5, and we're also going to halve the radius and height of these monsters to drop the hitbox size down accordingly. We'll also drop the health down to 20, and we're going to up their speed to 10. One other thing I'm going to include here is the translation property. This lets us adjust some colors on the standard Doom palette for this monster, and to help us with this we can look up the palette table on the Zdoom wiki. On this table, the standard imp brown colors range from 64 to 79, and I want to replace them with the blue line which has the numbers 192 to 207. So the way I do this is by opening up some quotation marks and entering 64:79 equals 192:207. Close those speech bubbles. This time we're going to do some tweaking in the states block as well, because I want to make some new attack logic for this imp. To do this, I'm going to edit the missile state. Like in the original imp, I'm going to have it display frames E and F, but for a little bit less time, 5 ticks. So it cycles through and shoots a little bit faster. Then on the G frame, where it used to throw its normal attack, I'm going to call a new function called A_custom combo attack. This function is going to let us create a custom attack that's very similar to the standard Doom attack. It'll do a melee scratch if the player is close, or throw a projectile if the player is far away. I pulled this up on the Zdoom wiki here, which shows us all the different parameters it needs inside its parentheses here. So it needs a projectile class, which I'm just going to put in blue imp ball for now, and we'll come back to that shortly. Then a comma separating the parameters. Next is a spawn height, which I'm going to set at 24, which is a little lower than the usual since our imps are small. Next is damage for the melee attack, which I'm going to actually put a bit of maths in to randomize. I'm going to take 5 and then times it by a random number between 2 and 5. So each ball does a minimum of 10 damage and a maximum of 25 before armor. Finally, for the melee attack sound, I'll just use the original Doom Imp scratch sound. I'll close this off by returning to the C state. And that's everything we need to change in our new Blue Imp class, but we do have to do one more thing, and that's create the Blue Imp Ball projectile class. Luckily we can do this using inheritance as well, so we'll create a new class, call it Blue Imp Ball, and inherit from the Doom Imp Ball. Now I've opened up the Doom Imp Ball class, which is a class for the Imp's projectile, and you can see that although there are some different properties and flags, it actually follows a very similar structure to the Imp. There's a default code block with some initial values, and there's a states block with a spawn state, which shows how the projectile looks flying through the air, then a death state, which is how it looks when colliding with something. The bright command just makes sure the projectile stays at full brightness, even in dark rooms. So let's make some quick changes to our Blue Imp Ball here. We'll change the radius to 3, height to 4, and scale to 0.5. And then we're going to lower the damage from the standard Imp Ball down to 2. This value is multiplied by a random number between 1 and 8, so it'll do 2 to 16 damage per hit before armor. I also want to mix up the color a little bit too, so I'm going to use the translation property again to swap out some of the orange palette between 208 and 223 with a smaller range of blue colors, 192 to 196. Now before we test this, I want to make this Blue Imp usable in Ultimate Doom Builder. So to do that, we have to assign a special number called a Doom Ed number. Every actor has a Doom Ed number associated with it, and this will allow Ultimate Doom Builder to see our new monster. We define this in map info, so let's make a map info lump and open it in the text editor. We only need to add one thing here, so let's create a Doom Ed nums code block. And then inside this, we want to have a nice high number. I like to start from 13,000 myself. This is so we don't overwrite any already defined items. All we need to do is type 13,000 equals class name, in this case Blue Imp. And that's it. Let's save this, close it up, and open up the map in Ultimate Doom Builder. We can go ahead and add a new thing, and in a custom folder down the bottom of the list you'll find our new monster. Let's throw a couple of these in and give it a test. Our brand new baby Blue Imps are now live and out for blood. Congratulations! The kids' gloves are off now. We're going to make a new custom monster, and this time we're not going to inherit anything from Doom Imp. We're going to build it all from scratch. Now I'll be using some functions and properties in here which I'll briefly explain the purpose of, but I won't go into depth on. And as I go along, I recommend pausing the video, looking up these functions on the Zdoom wiki website and reading up on them as we go to help understand what I'm adding in here. I have links to the actor properties, actor flags, and action functions sections of the wiki, so go onto those pages, hit Ctrl F and start typing in the functions as they come up to easily hunt them down. As a reminder, properties are the values we add in the default code block. Flags are also in the default code block and have a plus or minus next to them, and action functions are the words added in the lines of the states block. Before we do anything in Zscript though, we have another job to do, and that's to go hunting for some custom sprites to use. And the best place to do that is realm667.com. There's a link in the description below. Realm667 is a massive repository of custom monsters, weapons, obstacles, and more, which is available for anyone to download and use. Of course, you should make sure that you properly attribute anything you use here to the original creators. For this, we're going to hunt through the repository, so navigate to the pull-down menu and click on Doom Style under the Bestiary heading. Now, I fully recommend looking through the selection here another time and picking apart the content the community has shared, but for now we're just after the Pyro Imp, which as of creating this video is up the top of page 4. This imp was made by DreadOp, and the sprite edits were made by DreadOp and Ariance. Unzip this and open up the WAD in SLADE. Now this is in fact a full custom imp that you could load in as is. However, all we want is the sprites from it so we can make something new. It's also been made in the depreciated decorate format, so we'd have to convert it to Zscript if we wanted to use it properly. So we want to copy some of the content over from this WAD to our own. So grab the sprites and hit Ctrl+C, open up your own WAD and then hit Ctrl+V. Now because we have custom sprites, we need to wrap these in the SS start and SS end markers. So create some new markers here at the top and the bottom of these sprites. And then once we've done that, let's open up our Zscript file and rip into it. I'm going to call this imp variant a mother imp. So I'll make a class of mother imp and pull in the code from the actor class. Since we're not inheriting anything from another monster with this flavor of imp, we're going to have to fill in the default and states code blocks with everything that a monster needs ourselves. And a good way to get started with this is to also pull up the original imp and take a look at what they have. So let's put this one to the side and start filling in our default block. For health, I'm going to make this a strong monster and double the normal imp health to 120. Radius and height I'm going to bump up to 32 and 64 respectively. And since I've effectively just increased the monster's hitbox size, I'll also add a scale in here and set it to 1.3. Mass affects how much a monster will get knocked back when hit, so we'll keep that at 100. And likewise, we'll keep the speed to 8. Pain chance is the likelihood a monster will enter their pain state when hit and can be seen as a fraction of 256. So let's lower this down to 125, or roughly half the time it's been hit, it'll flinch. Next we come across a bit of an abstract property, monster. Looking into the documentation, this is just a shortcut property which sets all the standard monster flags that need to be activated to make our actor act like a monster. So we definitely want this in here. We'll add the plus floor clip into this as well, and since this is an imp, we'll copy all the standard imp sounds into the mix as well. Hit obituary and obituary are the lines of text that come up when a player is killed by this monster's melee and projectile states respectively. So we'll write something appropriate in here, and the tag is a monster's name which is used in player facing dialogue and the like. Since I'm not adding anything like that in here, I'm not going to bother adding the tag property at all. Next we'll get into the states, and like the properties we'll use the original Doom imp as a reference point here. The trick is we'll have to use the sprite naming conventions for the sprites we've just copied over. So in this case our custom imp uses the PRIM or prim prefix, so we'll make sure that we add that into these. So starting with spawn, we'll add PRIM AB10 A_look, and then we'll loop this spawn state just like the normal imp. Now I want this imp to be super aggressive and actually lob a fireball at the player as soon as it sees them. So I'm going to make an initial C state for the fireball logic, and then a C2 state, which is going to be our new C state. We'll give it a 6-tick pause beforehand though, just to give the player a fraction of a second to react. So in the C state, we're going to do PRIM A6 to give it a little pause. And then we're going to tell it to go to missile to immediately launch a missile, and we'll fill that out shortly. We'll then add a C2 state here and type in PRIM AABBCCDD3 A_chase, and then loop this C2 state. Next we'll add the blank melee state followed by the missile state and enter PRIM EF8 A face target followed by PRIM G6 a custom combo attack like our blue imp. We're going to use a standard Doom imp ball for this attack. We're going to spawn it at height 38, and we're going to put melee damage of 6 times random 2 to 5 to make it 12 to 30 damage before armor. And we're going to use the standard imp melee sound as well. Now after this imp throws one fireball, I want to have it sometimes immediately follow that up with another one. So I'm going to introduce a new function here called A_jump, which lets us set a particular chance out of 256 to jump to a certain state or line. In this case I'm going to go 127, which is roughly 50% chance to jump back to the start of this state, missile. This means there's a small chance that this imp might throw 2, 3, 4 or more fireballs in a row before hunting the player down again, depending on luck. So to do this I'm going to use a TNT1A placeholder sprite with 0 ticks and say A jump 127 for our chance, and then in speech marks, missile, and then close it off with a semicolon. And if this doesn't trigger, we want the mother imp to go back to the new C2 state, so we'll type in go to C2. Most of the rest of the imp I want to keep the same as the standard imp, so for the pain state, we're just going to add PRIM H2 A _pain, which will make it play the imp's pain sound, and then go to C2. And then for death state, I'm going to start it off the same as the other imp, so PRIM I8, PRIM J8 A _scream. But from here, I'm going to do something sneaky. What I want to happen is when this imp dies, one of our baby blue imps pops out. So I'm going to start by setting the A no blocking function a line earlier, so there's a little bit of extra room for the little blue imp to possibly spawn. So I'm going to type in PRIM K6 A _no blocking, and then on the next line I'm going to use a function called A _ spawn item X. This takes a whole bunch of parameters, some of which we won't use, so let's go through what we're using in the sequence. First, we need to enter the class name of the actor we want to spawn, in this case blue imp. The next 3 parameters is the spawn offset in the X, Y, and Z directions. This is how far away from the original monster the new one will spawn, so we want to put in some small randomization in each of these, just to make it look a little bit more natural when they spawn. So for the X and Y values, I'm going to put random -10 to 10, which means any value up to 10 units in front or behind, and to the left or right of the mother imp. The Z value will leave at 0, so it spawns on floor height. The next 3 values are the speed the new class is moving when it spawns. So let's once again give it a small push in the X and Y directions to make it look a little bit less robotic when it appears. Once again, random -10 to 10 in both the X and Y directions, and 0 in the Z. Everything else in this function I'm happy to leave as the default value, so I can close off my function here as it is, and finish filling out this die state. So the next line we're going to add is PRIM M-1, followed by the stop command. Now I'll recreate the X death state in here as well as per the original imp, and note that I'm not going to include a spawn item X function in this state, meaning that if the player manages to jib this mother imp, then no baby blue imps will spawn. We'll add a raise state here as well, just like the original, and then we're going to close off all of our code blocks. Finally, we have to go back to the map info lump and give our new mother imp a Doom ed number, this time 13,001. And let's go now into Ultimate Doom Builder, add a couple of these things into our map and test it out. And there it is, a mother imp that spawns baby blue imps on death. Absolute insanity. Congratulations, you've completed this bootcamp on SLADE editing and custom monsters for GZDoom. All I can say now is to get curious, explore the wiki and experiment. There's no limit to what you can accomplish if you're stubborn enough. If you made it this far and this video was helpful to you, consider liking and subscribing. I'm thinking about following this one up with a custom weapon guide or two, and then maybe branching out into other concepts, so if you have an interesting weapon concept in mind you'd like to see made, let me know and maybe I'll try and build it as part of the next guide. Until next time, thanks for watching.